We are learning from a U.S. official that Ukraine has agreed to a peace proposal to end the war with Russia, saying that only, quote, minor details are outstanding now. The word from Ukraine's President Zelensky is much work still lies ahead. The country's national security chief, though, says its delegation has reached an understanding on the core terms of the deal. And there's also word that Zelensky could travel to the United States this month to sign it. But what about Vladimir Putin? Today, U.S. and Russian officials are meeting in Abu Dhabi to discuss the plan. A spokesman for the U.S. Army Secretary, who's leading the delegation, says that those talks are going well and we remain optimistic. While people are clearly talking, the war rages on. Both Ukraine and Russia trading deadly new strikes overnight. Let's get to the White House. Elena Treen standing by for us at this hour. With this new development and new reporting from this U.S. official, what are you hearing about this supposed deal?
Yeah, look, this has been a crazy twist and turns to this entire negotiation over the past couple of days, Kate. But I can tell you that the Trump administration and White House officials really want to use the momentum of these recent talks and negotiations to try and see if they can bring this to the finish line. And I think that's part of why you're hearing a lot of these very optimistic and positive statements from key players on the ground. We heard similar, I should note, from Secretary of Marco Rubio following those talks in Geneva on Sunday. But I just want to get into what this U.S. official told our colleagues, Oren Lieberman and Natasha Bertrand. They said that Ukraine has agreed to a deal to end the war with Russia. Only minor details remain. They said, quote, the Ukrainians have agreed to the peace deal. There are some minor details to be sorted out, but they have agreed to a peace deal. That is a huge deal. We should just note, I think, like, full stop. That is a huge deal if Ukraine is actually backing this plan. As you mentioned, of course, the big question is whether the Russians could actually stomach a lot of this. Now, this comes as the U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll is in Abu Dhabi. He's meeting with Russian officials today. Of course, the goal there to see how much they can get them to compromise on some of these areas that the Ukrainians seem eager to work on. I will note that Ukraine's National Security Secretary, Rustem Umerov, he wrote about this in a post on X. I want to read this for you because what we're hearing from this U.S. official does seem to go a little bit beyond the position of the Ukrainians. The National Security Secretary said, quote, we now count on the support of our European partners in our further steps. He added that Ukraine looked forward to organizing a visit of Zelensky to the U.S. to, quote, complete final steps and make a deal with President Donald. So look, we have to see where this all comes down to. But again, I want to just reiterate how pretty quick this came together, because I'd remind you last week when details of this plan were initially emerging, at that point it was a 28-point plan that Steve Witkoff, one of the president's top advisors, had been quietly discussing with the Russians. There was a lot of skepticism from Ukraine and also the United States, European allies about whether or not it was in many ways a wish list for Russia. There were concerns that there were far too many concessions for the Ukrainians, not as many for the Russians, that it was too favorable. Now we're seeing, though, after a lot of these negotiations, particularly those in Geneva, as I mentioned on Sunday, it does appear that they were able to get this, working, we've heard Rubio call this a breathing document, this working deal to a place where the Ukrainians feel confident that they can go as far as this U.S. official is telling CNN today into agreeing to this deal. So big question now is whether they can take this to the Russians, get the Russians on board. And if that's actually a possibility, this could be a major breakthrough in something that has really been kind of, eluding the president and this administration for months now in their goal to finally find an end to this war between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, would be a major breakthrough for sure. The question about what's Russia going to do about it and say about it is also a huge question. Elena, thank you so much for the reporting. John?
All right, with us now is Senator Jeanne Shaheen, a Democrat from New Hampshire, the ranking member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, what do you make of this? I mean, this is a U.S. official saying that Ukraine has agreed to a proposal. We don't know what proposal, frankly. We don't know if this is a proposal the Russians have agreed to, and we're not even sure how the Ukrainians feel about it other than the comment from the U.S. official. But what questions do you have?
Well, I think it's premature to suggest that there's a final deal, but I understand that good progress was made yesterday in negotiations, and we'll see how the Russians respond to taking some of the items off the table. The original proposal was obviously a Putin wish list for everything they want, including no Ukrainian option for joining NATO, no NATO enlargement in the future, capping the size of Ukraine's military. None of that should be acceptable to the United States, to the Ukrainians, or to the Europeans. So the devil is in the details here. We need to see what kind of security guarantees are being provided to Ukraine, because what we've seen time and again is that Russia makes a commitment. They made a commitment not to go into Georgia. They went into Georgia in 2008. Then they signed the Budapest agreement in the 90s. They said, we won't attack Ukraine and they should give up their nuclear weapons. Well, they've attacked Ukraine now in Crimea. Then they went into Ukraine. So we can't trust what Russia says and what Putin says. So what we need is real security guarantees that are going to ensure that Ukraine is protected, that its sovereignty is protected in the future.
You said progress has been made. I guess specifically progress in what direction? What progress do you think there would need to be for you to support this and really for the Ukrainians to feel comfortable?
Well, again, I think we need to have real security guarantees, as I've said. I think any cap and any ability for Russia to determine how Ukraine's military moves forward is unacceptable. Ukraine right now has the biggest army in Europe. They are the most technologically advanced. We want that army on the ally side fighting with Europe and the United States in any future conflict. So we need to make sure that that is protected. We need to make sure that Ukraine's sovereignty is protected, that Russia understands that any attempt to go back in Ukraine is not only going to be met with European force, but with United States force. We also know that Russia is arming in a way that doesn't just allow them to go into Ukraine, but allows them to go after NATO countries and Eastern European countries. We need to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future, and there needs to be some accountability. This idea in the original proposal that anybody who committed war crimes would not be held accountable for that, that's not acceptable. We can't allow an aggressor like Vladimir Putin to get away with that, because it then sends a message to China, to Iran, to North Korea, to our other adversaries.
Look, we obviously need to see what is being discussed now, what exactly the plan is that's on the table. We'll find out more, presumably, over the next few hours. I want to rewind, if I can, 24 hours, because yesterday morning at this time, we were told that the White House might have a plan as soon as yesterday to extend Obamacare subsidies. They even floated some of the details of that plan, a 2-year extension, a cap on subsidies on income levels 700% above the poverty level, some basic required minimums there. Were this yesterday morning, and if that were the actual plan being discussed, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's very positive that President Trump is talking about coming to the table to address this issue. There is real urgency to get this done because people are seeing their insurance rates spike dramatically, and with the other affordability crisis that Americans are facing, that's unacceptable, because we're going to have millions of Americans lose their health insurance if that goes forward. I think some of the details that have come out about what the president were proposing would have been very good for Democrats. I think Democrats are willing to come to the table. I understood that a number of our Republican colleagues also wanted to get this done. It's in their interest. They understand that this is an issue not just for blue states, but for red states, and that people don't care what party you're in. If they can't afford their health insurance, that means they can't get the health care they need.
So the second part of this question, and why I tried to rewind to yesterday morning, is since yesterday morning, the president in the White House seemed to have backed off. The proposal didn't come yesterday, isn't coming today, at least as far as we know. And the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Speaker of the House Mike Johnson basically told the president Republicans won't support this. So what does it tell you that there may not be Republican support for the White House plan?
Well, that's unfortunate. I think if Republicans, they need to recognize that 57% of these premium tax credit recipients are in states that they're in Republican congressional districts, and 76% of them are in states that Donald Trump won in the last election. we've already heard from President Trump's pollsters, but two of whom have said if the Republicans don't come to the table, if they don't address this, they're going to pay at the polls next November. And that's what we're going to see. So it's very short-sighted for Speaker Johnson, for other Republicans to say they're not willing to address this, because the voters are going to hold them accountable, because people can't afford their health insurance. And that has ramifications for people who can't afford their health insurance. It has ramifications for the whole healthcare system as we look at people going to emergency rooms, and the cost of care there is much higher.
Senator Jeanne Shaheen from New Hampshire, have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thanks so much for being with us.